So let's talk about chapter 5 of the book Karma. Topic of chapter 5 is how did it all begin. So let's start with sutra first. Pure intelligence creates memory out of itself. The rest of creation projects memory as intelligence. First point is intelligence invents memory. So how did this self-perpetuating carousel begin? How did we get into this condition of servitude to memory cycle we do not remember starting? What got is started in the first place? It happened. On a certain day, a factory inspector in Russia went into a factory, pick out a particular worker and ask, if you had a sort of vodka, do you think you could still work? The worker scratched his hand. I guess so. Then the inspector asked, if you had a double shot of vodka, could you still work? The worker thought about it and shrugged. I think I can, he said. The factory inspector persisted. And if you had 5 shots of vodka, could you still work? The worker replied, hey, aren't I there? Hey, aren't I here? That is karma. You have had a million shots of vodka. Now it is just your forefathers living through you, repeating the same old theater of life with the same cues, the same triggers, and the same reactions over and over again. Where are you in all this? You are you are as impaired by karma as one would be by 5 shots of vodka. In such a state, the more activity you are required to handle, the greater the suffering for you. Even if this activity brings financial and social success, there is suffering. Why? Because you are driving under the influence. What is the point of this repetition, you might ask? For the human being who seeks freedom, this is a natural question. If you want to become free of outside influence, if you do not want your long dead great grandfather or your mother to be pushing your bottoms long after they are gone, you might wonder how to step out of the cycle. Which brings up the inevitable question, why karma? Who started this cycle? What is the origin of memory? What is its source? How did the whole drama begin? The many creation myths in the world have tried to address this question in a variety of ways. The yogic creation story is a scientific truth expressed in strikingly poetic imagery. It tells us that it all started with the realm of infinite emptiness. This is a dimension that has no memory at all. It is pure intelligence. It has no form, no shape, no size, no color. It is in fact no nothing, no thing, no slice thing. And it exists. This is called Shiva. See slice Va. That is that which is not. It is the very basis of creation. Okay? Shiva, C hyphen Va, and in nothing, no hyphen thing. Now the very birth of form, even if it is a wave or just a particle, necessitates memory. You did not emerge from nothing. It is a form to template of your parents that you were created. This means that memory or karma is a prerequisite for form. So how did the first form happen? How did it materialize without memory? The yogic culture personifies a certain concept, infuses drama into it, and turns it into stories. The story mode enables it to speak of dimensions that are beyond the realm of logic, and so it personifies infinite emptiness. It turns Si hyphen Va, that which is not, into Shiva, the divine being who is the source of all creation, and so the story begins. It happened. Shiva, the lord of creation, was lying in his nascent state, devoid of any karma. Then an element of dynamism enters this emptiness. This was Shakti, the active aspect of emptiness. She approached Shiva and began to play with him. The human imagination sees the first karma as a sexual act. And so, as she aroused him, he woke with a great roar. He now assumed the form of a linga, a primal ellipsoid form. This, the yogi Lord tells us, was the first form in all creation. And with that sexual act, we are told the whole of creation begin. The primordial sexual act between Shiva and Shakti ignite the void into a dynamism, state of creation, maintenance, and destruction. And thus there emerged the grand theatre of the cosmos, time and space, name and form, birth and death. Gradually, from began to perpetuate more form, memory began to spawn more memory. The karmic cycle was set into motion. Some physicists I have met agree that the Big Bang that began the universe could well have been a series of bangs. In an automobile, if you take off the manifold and start the engine, it would sound like a volley of bangs. But if you throttle up, the engine roars. So a series of bangs in close succession does in fact becomes a roar. And so the big bang of modern science and the big roar of the yogic lore are not so different. Physicists also say that the first form in creation was ellipsoid, reinforcing the yogic perspective that was always seen the linga form as sacred. In interest, Interestingly, scientific experiment today shows that if you create an energy pattern outside a chamber in a vacuum state, virtual protons and virtual neutrons will begin to appear. That means, to put it simply, that something is taking form from nothing. Now, for the birth to form, now for the birth of form, as we have said, memory is a prerequisite. It is only because of elemental, atomic, and evolutionary memory that a snake is different from a tree, for instance. So, in order to produce the first form, intelligence invents memory. This means the first act of creation marks the birth of memory of karma. No surprisingly, Shiva as a deity is considered to have no parentage, no ancestry, no past whatsoever. He is called Swayambhu, self created. Here is a major difference between the source of creation and the rest of creation. The source of creation is pure intelligence that creates memory out of itself. The rest of creation projects memory as intelligence. That is an enormous difference with a wealth of implications. Another creation myth, that of Adam and Eve, also suggests that the birth of memory based knowledge is the beginning of the fall. It is with knowledge that Adam and Eve fell from paradise. It is with knowledge, one might say, that the trap begins. Human beings now moved from a pristine intelligence to memory that projects itself and as intelligence. The journey from intelligence to intellect and from consciousness to self consciousness. What we call knowledge refers to frozen accumulated memory. Knowing, on the other hand, is a dynamic process. It is living wisdom, not dead information. Instead of tending to the root, Adam and Eve grew fascinated by the fruit. Instead of nursing the tree of life, they began to fixate on the succulence of the end product. They began choosing product over process, destination over journey, karma over yoga, acknowledge over knowing. They were so beguiled by the consequence of their action that they began to see life as a means to an end. This is a sadly reductive way to live life. For as soon as you seek to freeze or grasp or manipulate the great roaring cascade, cascade of life, you have to stand apart from it. The moment you stand apart, you create division between root, stem, and fruit, between past, present, and future. Now we have the birth of time, and with this, bondage begins. In the East, we would see the fall as the birth of cycles, the beginning of karma. We called these repetitive cycles samsara. The birth of memory is the beginning of form, of cycles of birth and death. And yet, in the East, we see this as neither good nor bad. It is simply the way things are when viewed from a limited perspective. When cyclical time is born, memory becomes important. Now, a proton, neutron, and electrons behaves in a hydrogen atom is not the same as the way they behave in an oxygen atom. As atomic memory grows more complex, you have more names for all these atomic constructions. But in reality, these are just the different behavior of the same particle. From the particle to atom, from the molecule to the amoeba, from the fish to the human being. The differences are many, but essentially this process means an increase in the complexity of memory. Look at the utterly staggering diversity of creation, all made possible by the capacity of a primordial intelligence to create memory. Next point is authentic intelligence versus artificial intelligence. Nowadays there is a debate going on artificial intelligence, so let's look into it. At the age of 13, when I saw a calculator, I was deeply offended. I wondered why on earth I was being tortured in my math class when all the teachers needed to do was to consult consult a machine for the answer. All the teacher need to do was to consult a machine for the answer. I dreamed of the day when there would be a machine for my science class and every other class as well. In the world today, those with great memories are considered intelligent. They pass examination with ease, often get the top grades, go on to get PhDs and become scholars of repute. All this is quite simply because they remember what they study and are efficient at processing it. In the yogic tradition, it is only if you touch chitta, the dimension of intelligence, unsullied by even an iota of memory, that you are considered enlightened. Until then, you may be learned, you may be scholarly, you may know a great deal about creation, but you know nothing about the source of creation. You know nothing about the dimension of intelligence beyond the ambit of your personal karma. Traditionally, in the Indian subcontinent, wisdom was prized over knowledge. Human memory was certainly valued, and those who could recite the Vedas backward were considered great scholars. However, thought was never accorded ultimate importance because it was seen as the product of memory, of intellect. This is why the guru was considered more significant than the scholar. Education, percentage, and pedigree were socially significant but never existentially significant. What was value was this profound innate intelligence, a capacity to perceive existence as it is rather than as we think it is or should be. In the next couple of decades, the upswings of artificial intelligence will radically change the way we look at the concept of intelligence. Our ideas of education will be fundamentally altered. If you are looking for tools of self transformation, a memory based educational system will be of little use. The intellect, which is based on memory, is a wonderful tool. However, it can only inform, it cannot transform. Very important. In an age of artificial intelligence, only those who are capable of exercising intelligence beyond memory will have something truly valuable to contribute. The fundamental difference between a human being and a machine is perception. Perception is something a machine will never possess. The machine will be capable of data accumulation, analysis, and action, all of which are functions of the intellect, but little less. The human being is an organic machine, but a machine nonetheless. If we are to distinguish ourselves from other machines in any meaningful way and not merely replicate their functions, we need to empower our capacity to perceive. For this, we need to reclaim our access to that unfettered, unprejudiced intelligence, which in Sanskrit is called chitta, that is the basis of our lives. What is chitta? It is the deepest level of the mind. It is awareness, aliveness, a profound intelligence that lies beyond intellect, beyond memories, beyond judgment, beyond karma, beyond all divisions. It is the intelligence of existence itself, the living mind of the cosmos. In the yogic tradition, it is said that once you distance yourself from the compulsions of your karmic software, is the identification of your intellect, you are in touch with this unclouded consciousness, and only when we access chitta is self transformation possible. This is why, as a guru, I never bless people with the wish that their dreams should come true. Since dreams are simply based on memory, you can dream only of a more magnified and more improved version of what you already know. If your dreams come true, there is nothing terribly special about that. My wish is that your dreams should be shattered. Only then will something larger than memory manifest in your life. May something you could never dream of happen to you. Is karma, next point is karma a dirty word? We have looked at how karma began. Part 2 of this book will look at how it might end. But a crucial question we need to address is this: do we really want it to end? Is memory a burden? Is karma an obstacle? Is samsara a curse? Is life unmitigated? Is life unmitigated suffering? Not in the least. Let me state let me state this unequivocally. Karma is not a dirty word. Certain religious strands have over time begun to view the human beings as inherently impure or soiled or sinful. They see human life as a curse rather than a blessing, a condition from which one needs to be cured or saved or rescued. While freedom is a laudable aspiration, let us never forget this fact. Karma is the basis of human life. Karma is what gives you physical form and psychological structure, solidity, and stability. It offers a foundation for your life. Without this foundation, there would be no possibility of transcendence. You, your body, and your mind are bound together only because of the karmic process. Without karma, neither your body nor your mind would exist. You, as you understand yourself, would not be around. So, karma is in fact a tremendous possibility. Every moment, impressions are flooding in torrents into your system through five sense organs, through your five sense organs, and each impression is being recorded. There is nothing wrong with this. This stored information is very useful for your survival. If you deleted all of it, you would not know how to handle even the simplest aspect of life. Karma is the glue that makes you stick to this body mind mechanism. If you washed away all your karma, you would exist your body this very instant. Your software is not the problem. It turns into a problem only if it becomes the ruling factor in your life. Karma is just your own creation. It is neither virtuous nor evil, good or bad. It is because you are looking at it through the prism or prejudice of memory that something seems wonderful and something seems horrible. Karma is the basis of your individuality, but it is also the basis of your prejudice. The problem with karmic memory is that it has stuck to you. If everything that passes by is stuck to this mirror, it is a no good mirror. Your mirror can no longer show your life the way it is. Your perception is now seriously clouded. Now karma becomes a limitation. Of course, there is much to celebrate about memory. Memory makes us unique. Memory makes every individual dazzlingly singular. It is responsible for the biodiversity and cultural variety we see around us today. It is memory that makes the world such an incredibly interesting place to live in. Memory is undeniably a privilege, an enormous privilege. The rub is that memory is not just a glue, it is also a boundary. It offers you form and definition, but over time that very form becomes a limitation and the definition becomes a wall. You are gradually fettered by the definitions you seek to acquire. You joyfully celebrate these definitions, perhaps of family, clan, tribes, class, gender, religion, culture, language. But over time, these definitions harden into rigid markers of identity. Before you know it, you have crafted your own prison. Whether gilded by of iron barred or cage is still a cage. The tragedy is that you are imprisoned by walls of your own making. There are walls and bars you have erected unconsciously and which now do not allow you to escape. You are the builder, but you have now imprisoned yourself in your own home. You, your creation that was a source of sanctuary and identity has now turned into a carapace. Carapace. You have spun such a cocoon of confinement around yourself that now you cannot fly free. You have become your own jailer. What then is the way out? Part 2 of this book explores the various ways in which you can work with and through your karma to address this unquenchable human longing to be free. It offers you ways to enjoy memory without being oppressed by it. It offers you way in which you can live in this world without adding to your already burdensome freight of karma. It offers you a chance to navigate your journey through this world without being worn and abraded by the ride. You can feel the breeze on your face and the sun on your skin, but you do not gather needless grim and aren't at the mercy of changing weather. The next section empowers you to make the journey home, homeward by showing you a path that the greatest sages have known since time immemorial. How you can be in the world but not of it. This path reminds you that while karma is your bondage, if you handle it right, karma can also be a stepping stone to your liberation. So this is the end of chapter 5 of part 1 of this book. Okay, later I recorded other chapters of part 2 so that you can learn this topic in a better way and understand it in a good way. So I hope you learn it, you enjoy it, and gain some perspective, some knowledge out of it. So keep learning, keep growing. Thank you. Namaskaram. Okay.